Life change stories are the heart of the lifeline of this ministry because we know that when Jesus does something in us, he can do something through us. And today I want to share a little bit of my life change story with you as we jump into today's podcast. Well, welcome to Hope and Recovery. This is a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast that shares hope and healing for our mental, spiritual, emotional, and relational journey through life change stories and recovery topics, all centered around the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5 and the Celebrate Recovery principles, where Jesus helps us through his power face our hurts, hangups, and habits and relational struggles so that we can walk in the newness of life as he designed for us in our life under his power. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. My name is Rodney. I'm the pastor at Fellowship Bible Church Celebrate Recovery in Rogers, and it's so good to be here with you today. I hope you're doing well. I hope you have been making it through the holiday season well and going to meetings and connecting with your network. That's so important to keep using the tools that God has given us. And so grateful to be here with you today. I decided I wanted to do something a little bit different in actually sharing a little bit more of my story. Some of you have heard my story, but sometimes it can be valuable to hear this and be able to play that. So I'm going to share not my full-blown testimony, but I want to share just kind of some big pieces of that to hopefully bring some encouragement to you. What I love about testimonies is it does give us that oxygen. And so if you're in a bad spot, I just want you to try to find your own story in my story. And by the way, every single Friday night at Celebrate Recovery, every day of the week across the world, people hear, Friday nights here at my local CR, but all over the world, different nights of the week, we hear these life change stories. So it's the fruit of what Jesus does in and through our lives through Celebrate Recovery. So anyway, let me give you a little bit of my story. I grew up, in what you've kind of heard referred to as a broken home. I had, there was 5 of us boys. We had 3 different fathers and multiple stepfathers. When I did a genogram in grad school, I don't know how many of these men were actually legally married to my mom. At the very least, they were common law husbands. But I had many, many, many stepfathers, and it's just a testament of my mom's own hurt that she was dealing with in her life. My biological dad, through lots of dysfunction on both sides, my mom and my dad, he was out of the picture when I was about 2 years old. And for many years, I held an incredible resentment, anger toward him. And I know now, though, that it was toward my mom as well. But in that moment, I held great anger, abandonment issues, and this common denominator of my stepdad's entering the picture with a common thread of physical, verbal, emotional abuse, drugs, alcohol. It was just a messy place, contaminated. So our home was made up of a lot of physical, mental abuse, and it really did pollute our home. And there's really too many stories that I could share about the trauma that I experienced as a little boy, but I saw a lot of people overdosing, saw violence, dysfunction, all these just lots of dysfunction and toxic environment. But one of those stories that rings still to this day in my mind is the interaction I had with one of my stepfathers, and he would help me with my homework at the kitchen table, and he had alcohol issues with that, a lot of anger, very short-tempered. And I can remember sitting at the table, which was a pretty regular thing. I'd sit at the kitchen table doing homework, and inevitably, while sitting at that kitchen table, if I didn't understand the homework, he would try to explain it to me. And if I didn't understand it, specifically math. Math was always a weakness for me. He would get frustrated, and you could feel this rage building inside of him, almost like a volcano, right? And it would always come to full eruption. And that would usually result in him physically hitting me. And I can still remember, back in that time there was shag carpet, and I can still remember the smell of the shag carpet. I can remember the paint on the walls. I can remember the plant that I would fall into that was behind the table at the kitchen table in the back corner. And I would just find myself kind of disheveled, bloodied, broken, disoriented, just hear the ringing in my ears. And I find my way back. I kind of fumble my way back into my chair, and it would happen over and over and over and over again. Kind of a messy situation, isn't it? And this is what I've learned through recovery, that this was one of my earliest memories that men, especially men, but let alone people, were no longer safe for me. And I felt all alone. I felt helpless. I felt hopeless. I felt abandoned. And I knew that no one in my heart at that time could be trusted with my pain. So all of this inevitably led to unhealthy or dysfunctional coping strategies and addictions at a very, very young age. And all of it was a result of trying to hide and numb out from my pain. And for many years, again, I'm learning this on the back end, for many years I stayed that little boy hidden underneath that kitchen table. I was frozen in my pain and unable to emotionally face my pain. Though I was growing into a young man and eventually into an older man, that little boy was still living there. And so at the age of 10, because I was unable to face my pain and I didn't have a healthy environment, not to justify my choices, but it made sense why I was doing what I was doing. I was introduced to alcohol and marijuana and really any kind of drug that was thrown in front of me. If it would numb me in any way, I tried it. Unfortunately, I put a lot of bad things in my body, and I began even using with my mom and my stepfathers, whoever was in the picture. And my mom had her own dysfunctional view, caught up in her own web of dysfunction, that she believed that if I was using and drinking with her under her quote unquote supervision, as silly as that sounds, I would be safe. Yeah, that's pretty high dysfunction in it. But again, I don't blame her. She had her own stuff, but I had to be honest about the pain. I have to be honest about what was happening. So I can remember our home being just made up of countless home parties. We would be exposed to a lot of things: unhealthy relationships, sex, alcohol, drugs. And that was just a picture. I'm the oldest because my older brother was adopted out. He was put in foster care and adopted out. So I was in essence the oldest of four boys, though there were five of us. The older brother was adopted out, and that's a whole nother story for another time. But it was a regular thing for me to look after my brothers when my mom and my stepdad at the time would go out, and they most of the time, they would come home intoxicated, but usually fighting with each other. Usually, you looked at that woman, and there's a kind of a fit of rage and jealousy, and I can still remember like it was yesterday, waking up in the middle of the night, hearing the quiet of the night becoming sheer madness. My parents fighting, screaming, glasses being thrown against the wall, doors being slammed, and unfortunately, times when I would hear my mother literally fighting for her life. So take this picture. I'm just a scrawny little kid, and I'm hearing my mom fighting for her life. And I didn't have anything in my body, muscle mass-wise, to do anything, but just really more of a distraction. Most of the time I could tune it out, but then I would try to just fight for my mom, and I'd make attempts to rescue her, and you can imagine how that would go. Those attempts would just result in those beatings turning toward me and lots of damage there. But that was an ugly life. And I used to ask that question, where was God in all of this? I really did begin to believe that my life that as it was, this is my lot in life. This is my destiny, and it's never going to improve. And so when we would go through life, my mom having multiple men in and out of our life, and we would move from city to city and state to state, and we finally ended up in Phoenix, Arizona, in our efforts to run from men. And I can still remember, like it was yesterday, walking into our apartment and seeing my mom sitting on the couch. She was looking at me. I could still remember those bright green eyes. And I asked my mom what was wrong with her because I could tell something was wrong. And I just remember her saying, "I've done something really wrong, son." And she held out her arms to show some marks where she had shot up drugs with a needle for the first time. See, she had sworn in all of her drug use, "I will never use needles." And I've heard Mac talk about this in his story. We even in drug addictions, we have a line, and usually we cross it. And she crossed that. And she crossed that line using a needle, and it scared the fire out of her. And she was ready to leave there. And I was a young punk teenager at the time, and so I convinced her somehow, I still don't know how, I convinced her to let me stay. I think I was 16 at the time, maybe 15, I don't remember exactly. But I'm living with a friend who was a drug dealer and in our complex, and that sounded like a good combo. But my mom moved away, and man, I felt like I had arrived. I felt like I was all that, but I wasn't. I began selling drugs for Marvin. You know, he would just kind of, "Hey, go do this, go take this to this guy," that kind of thing. And I just did what I was told. But unfortunately, my addictions began to grow to daily smoking and snorting cocaine. I was smoking marijuana multiple times a day. It was just a nasty recipe for disaster. But there was one individual, a guy in our complex, and I can still remember taking him in the middle of the night. I mean, we're talking like 2 a.m. At times I would drive his car. I didn't even have a license. I was old enough to have a license, but I didn't have one. I didn't get my license till I was like 18. But I'm driving this guy, an addict. I'm an addict myself. I'm driving at 2 o'clock in the morning at Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm taking him to his ATM machine to get money out so that he could buy drugs. And guys, when I think about that, I think about he had 2 beautiful little girls. He had a wife, and I was a part of feeding his addiction. And that just makes me sick today to think about. But so I'm living now, a school dropout. I'm living in the middle of this drug-infested environment. Too many things, crime and gangs and prostitution all around our community. And it wasn't unusual to see people to be there one day and gone the next. Drug raids, people overdosing, seeing people, and just the result of darkness and selfishness ruin people's lives. And when money got tight for me and Marvin, we'd live from house to house. We'd sleep on couch to couch, and we did everything we can and to survive. And I remember Marvin, I was tagged along with him. I didn't actually do anything, but I was guilt by association. This guy, this drug dealer, he was arrested for stealing a VCR. There's a video cassette recorder. He stole that from a local housewife so he could sell it to buy more drugs so that we could make more money. And I remember that I was arrested for and brought in for questioning for what I might know about what happened. And I knew enough I couldn't rat him out. But that cop, he went from a nice cop to a really mean cop because he caught me in a bunch of lies and was threatening to lock me up for a long time. But I spilled my guts. And I remember driving home at that moment, and I can still see the police officer's face in the rear view mirror looking at me. And I was scared. I knew that I was in danger. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I remember him looking at me through the mirror and saying, "I would advise you to try to get away from here. Can you get out of here?" And I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I think he could see the fear in my eyes, and something was going to have to give here. And I'll never forget this same guy that I used to drive the ATM machine, he took me aside and he said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but my wife and I talked about it. We want to buy you a plane ticket to get you out of here. And he bought me a plane ticket. The same guy that I had a part in almost destroying his family bought me a plane ticket. You talk about sufficient grace and undeserved grace. I didn't deserve that kind of grace and love, but he bought me a plane ticket to get me out of there. And I flew out of there and was able to move into the next chapter of my life. So I'm going to take a quick break right here. When we come back, I'll continue the conversation, sharing a little bit of my testimony. Stick with me, and I'll be right back. Hey, friends, if you are looking for a safe place to find freedom from your hurts, hangups, and habits, please don't try to face this alone. Join us on a Friday night on our Fayetteville campus or our Rogers campus at Fellowship. Every single Friday night at 6 p.m., we have Connection Cafe. 7 p.m., we have our general meeting. We would love to have you join us. Come join us. Go to fellowshipcr.org for more information. You just got to get through the door and we'll take care of the rest. We hope to see you this Friday night. fellowshipcr.org for more information. Welcome back. Right before I went to the break, I was talking about just how this guy generously and graciously bought me a plane ticket. And here's the thing. I did get out of there, and I never touched cocaine or marijuana again. I don't know how that happened. I think part of it was white knuckling and scared for my life. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. It was not a good place for me, but at least I was out of that environment. And I moved in with my stepfather and my mom, and I got back into school. That's where I started kind of finding some normalcy, whatever that is. And my mom, with my stepdad, the work dried up there. He was a shingler, and I worked with him for a while, shingling houses. But they had to move on again. And I was tired of moving. I was tired of running. I was tired of just that life. And I wanted to stay in school. I wanted to have friends. I wanted to do something different. So I stayed behind. My mom moved on again. And I continued school. I began working for my music teacher, Mr. Taylor, doing some odd jobs. He was my music teacher, great man. But I'd be lying if I said it was easy starting at a freshman level, being 2 years older than everyone in my class. I felt so humiliated. I felt like an idiot. But I felt determined. I knew what life could be, and I wanted that. And my music teacher, Mr. Taylor, had no idea that I was living on my own. And it's a long story, another story for another time. But I ended up not being able to pay my bills, and we were living in low income housing anyway. And if you can't have electricity, then you can't live in these low income houses. At least that's the way it was then. So they served an eviction notice to my mom. They were actually serving me, not knowing it was me, but they served it to my mom. And I went to Mr. Taylor, who was close to retirement, and asked him, and he actually let me, with his wife, sweet wife Barb, come live with the two of them. And to this day, I'm still stunned that they let me into their life, but they are like a second set of parents for me. In fact, we named my daughter Taylor after them. It was just a sweet thing. Just being able to just name one of our children after them. But one of the requirements to live with them was to go to church, and I went to church with them. And it was there that I found and accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And the cool thing is, though I struggle with a low self-esteem, Mr. Taylor, he pulled these gifts out of me that I didn't even know I had musically, vocally. And he helped me to gain confidence. And I found he helped me get a scholarship to go to college, which is mind-blowing, because I always thought I would die young. But here now I'm talking about going to college. And I go to college and I meet my wife, Carol, who's also a scholarship student, and I instantly fell for her. We married 10 months later, which is fast, but I knew I wanted her to be my wife, and we just fell in love, and we now have two beautiful kids that are adult kids now. We consider them gifts from God. But coming into that marriage, you can imagine the baggage, the low self-esteem, dysfunctional view on the family. And I had so many character defects. When my son was little, we nearly lost him in my wife's pregnancy, and that took a huge toll on us. And in struggles, in pain, in conflict, I learned to run. But instead of running physically, I ran emotionally, and I hid myself in my work. And my wife was the only one going to church at the time because I was just too busy. Yeah, right. I'd become a workaholic. And I'd work ridiculous amounts of time, go in early, stay really, really late, and do it over and over and over again. See, I'd shifted my drug addiction to work addiction and people pleasing, and that's not a healthy place. But about a year or so into our marriage, my wife and I separated, and we were on the brink of divorce. My wife was beat down emotionally, and she had nothing left in her tank to give to our relationship. And you can imagine how devastated that left me. I fell into a deep depression, even thought of suicide. I knew I was to blame, and I couldn't bear the thought of being without her and my son at the time. After a few weeks about going through my pity party and falling into some of these old dysfunctional views, I came to realize that I wasn't ready for this relationship to be over. I drew closer to Christ, and I began praying for the relationship, and God did bring us back together. And we sought out counseling to mend those hurts and the pain that was caused. And I'm so excited and blessed to be able to say with gratitude, my wife and I have been married almost 32 years. That's only God's grace. But about 18 years ago, I started coming to this church that I'm going to now, Fellowship, and started going to Celebrate Recovery to help out with worship. I could lead. I was a singer. I could lead in worship. I was doing that in other venues. And I thought I was just coming to help out, but eventually I came on staff at that church, at this church Fellowship in Rogers, Arkansas, and I became the ministry leader. So I jumped into a small group, step study group, so I could learn the ministry to help all those really screwed up people, right? I now know I am one of those people, but I remember going to my first open share small group on a Friday night, and it was actually at the conference in California, the Adult Child of Dysfunctional Family. And I was really going because I was being too lazy. My buddy Steve was going in that group, and I didn't want to find another group. But when I started reading through this issue pamphlet, I realized that this is my story. Everything that I was reading made so much sense. It gave me freedom to know there was an explanation, not justification, but explanation. And I began working through the principles, and I found that God had some work to do on me and my heart. Though I wasn't using cocaine and alcohol anymore or marijuana, I identified some unhealthy core beliefs, some patterns of isolation and depression that I could fall into so easily. I learned that in this process, I have to turn my entire life and will over to His care. See, what I learned is when I left Phoenix, Arizona as a scared teenager, I never touched drugs and alcohol again. That's through God's grace. That doesn't always happen that way. But what I learned through Celebrate Recovery is I was still carrying the junk that led me to use drugs and do alcohol in the first place. I realized that in recovery, the problem of addictions was not the problem. It was a symptom. I had so much bitterness, so much resentment built up from that trauma. And Celebrate Recovery taught me to bring my pain forward and let other people into that. CR's taught me I don't have to run to my old coping strategies. As I got in and started doing the work in the small group setting, eventually in the step study and the open share group combined, that I don't have to use those old coping strategies for comfort anymore. I don't have to use those old defenses and protections to hide from my pain, that I can replace those negative core beliefs that would inevitably take me to some coping strategies just to confirm what I believed about myself. One of the greatest fruits in this recovery process as I began dealing with and facing the pain was my relationship with my mom and being able to just pour Jesus into her. And I was a part of leading her in her walk to Christ in her final years of life. And I'm so grateful for that. That's just one of those big fruit moments. But here's the thing. Through Celebrate Recovery, I've been able to forgive. I've been able to forgive my mom. We were able to make peace before she left, but I've been able to forgive my stepfathers, even my dad, even though I don't have a relationship with him, from the abuse and the abandonment from my stepfathers. I learned to be obedient to God, to forgive them, and one by one take those issues to Him. See, I'm no longer that scared little abused boy that's hiding under that table. And here's the cool thing. Jesus didn't expect me to crawl out under my own power. No, he just wanted me to invite him in. Jesus met me in my pain and found me under that table, and he invited me into a new and healthy space I now call life and recovery. As I mentioned, I've been able to forgive my dad, and I find peace that I'm not holding grudges. I do hold out hope that one day he'll come back into my life and we'll be able to have a relationship. I don't know if that will happen, but I want him to see my adult children in their lives who are now both married, giving me and my wife the gift of our four-year-old grandson and our 1-year-old granddaughter, and now our newest 2-month-old grandson. Such a blessing. But here's the thing, guys. I still struggle in my life as everyone else does, but now I call upon my network, and especially Christ, to keep me from running to that dark cave and coping strategies. So important in my life. But most recently, even just 3 years ago, I faced one of my biggest tests in my life in recovery. I had surgery on my nose to correct a deviated septum. It was a correction stemming from ongoing physical abuse as a child. Well, the next day after surgery, I found myself lying in an ambulance in the driveway because I had passed out and my heart had stopped. The paramedics came to the door and told my wife that they were taking me to a closest hospital because they weren't sure if I was going to make it. It was a scary time. But it was a several-month process with multiple late-night trips to the ER, a couple more heart stoppages, and lots of struggles. But in the end, I found that I needed a pacemaker. I needed medication to control my low blood pressure. Here's the cool thing in this. This is such a great thing that God doesn't waste hurts. God used something really bad, a broken nose from abuse as a child, to help me find healing from something I didn't even know that I needed. At the same time, I'm carrying this right before my pacemaker. During a 3-month period, I experienced this compounded loss, grieving the loss of Mr. Taylor, my music teacher that I spoke of. Lost a good friend and mentor, the Celebrate Recovery founder, Pastor John Baker, and a close friend that was my best man in my wedding, and died of a sudden heart attack at a very young age. There was so much fear, so much pain, so much overwhelming emotions. But through these struggles, the old me would have run and tried to numb out from the substances. But through CR, I was able to use the tools and the resource of people to notice my pain, invite it in, organize it, and share it with my wife, God, and others in Celebrate Recovery. In my past, this is the cool thing, the fruit of this. Men were unsafe and were my abusers. But in CR, God has brought me full circle to learn how to trust and invite men into those scary parts of my heart. And such a blessing. There's a passage that I love in Matthew 11, and maybe that just read this over to you. Come to me, Jesus. This is Jesus talking to us. Come to me and I will give you rest. All of you who work so hard beneath a heavy yoke, wear my yoke, for it fits perfectly. And let me teach you, for I am gentle and humble, and you shall find rest for your souls, for I give you only light burdens. See, I used to ask, where was God in all of this? And I now know he was always with me, even in the deepest pits of my addictions and pain. But what I was able to understand was that I was the one that turned my back on him in my pain. And if you're a first-time listener or you're new to this process, maybe you're not in a small group, step study group, can I just say, don't quit before your miracle happens. Change is possible. Christ is right here with you right now as you listen to this. He's waiting on you to choose him. And you keep coming back. If you've not gone to Celebrate Recovery, go to Celebrate Recovery. It'll only help yourself, but you will bring so much hope to those around you as you break the cycle of dysfunction in your life. People need to see the growth in your life as you go and grow through this process. As we say in Celebrate Recovery, keep coming back, because it works if you work it, and it won't if you don't. Jesus wants to do a miracle in our life. Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of my story. I hope that brings some encouragement to you. This is a process, isn't it? life change story. Maybe you don't have as crazy story as I do. If you're hurting, if you're broken, if you feel lost, if you feel separated from the Lord, that's big, that's huge, and He wants to help you through that. So whatever is creating sadness for you, creating sadness for Him, bring it to the Father. Join us on this journey we call Celebrate Recovery. And we don't celebrate our pain, we celebrate our Savior that meets us in our pain. That's what we call it, Celebrate Recovery. So don't face this alone, guys. Join us on this journey. All you got to do is take that first step. Go to fellowshipcr.org if you want more information. But come join us on a Friday night at Fellowship Fayetteville, Fellowship Rogers. You will not regret it, I promise. Hey, thanks so much for being with me today and let me share my story. I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, God bless.